Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. India and the 10-member ASEAN have agreed to initiate a review of the bilateral free trade agreement in goods to make it more user-friendly, simple and trade facilitative. India is not happy about the fact that its trade deficit with ASEAN has widened significantly since the Pact was implemented in January 2010. A NITI Aayog study reveals that India's trade deficit with ASEAN doubled to $10 billion in 2017 from $5 billion in 2011. A review of the India-ASEAN FTA could help improve utilization in India by making the pact simpler and more user-friendly. In the joint statement, the ministers welcomed the recommendations of the ASEAN-India Business Council to further promote the potential of bilateral trade through the utilization of the ASEAN-India FTA as well as cooperation in some areas of mutual interest such as financial technology, connectivity, startups and innovation, empowerment of youth and women, and MSME development. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the trade and economy relationship between India and ASEAN. Joining me on the program today are Shivshankar Mukherjee, former ambassador, Rajendra Harshe, foreign affairs expert and former Professor, Department of International Relations, South Asian University. And also joining us on the program is Geetanjali Nataraj, Professor of Applied Economics, Indian Institute of Public Administration. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. India has managed to push the ASEAN members to review the FTA Pact. Your thoughts on that?
Well, we've been, as your report pointed out, we've been trying for quite some time to review this free trade area simply because the trade imbalance was a factor of worry. And at the present moment, when the economic decline in India in various sectors is very much a subject of the day, this assumes even greater importance, at least in terms of perception. There are complaints on our side in terms of the fact that the free trade area, free trade agreements always have a positive and a negative list. One of our complaints is that our negative list is quite short, about 10% of the whole gamut of goods and services, whereas some of the ASEAN countries have a much bigger list of a negative list that is excluded, and so on, including perhaps, at least according to reports in the press, certain tariff barriers or certain non-tariff barriers as far as services are concerned, which is one of India's strengths. The problem was that the free trade area agreement, FTA agreement, did not have a review or an exit clause, which we could sort of use to get the review done. But so the news that they have agreed for a review is obviously good news for the Indian negotiators. Having said that, I'll just make one more point about the political aspect of it, which is that trade is one of the underpinnings of any of our major relationships around the world. I mean, it doesn't need a Donald Trump to drive that message home. Trade with ASEAN is fundamental to our overall Act East, Look East and Act East policy in terms of security, in terms of our overall, national endeavor, in terms of international relations, in terms of national security, in terms of our overall national interest. So, and trade becomes very, very central to this because for each country, for each of the 10 ASEAN countries and for India, anything that affects their internal dynamics in terms of employability, their GDP growth and so on, and which therefore is linked to, in a globalized world, which is very much linked to the export effort and to regional trade, is of enormous importance. So I hope we can strike a balance between not just simply aiming to redress the balance and that's it, but to come up with a fair solution where we find access to their markets in a fair fashion while giving access in a fair fashion to their goods and services.
All right. Talking about a solution, where does the solution lie, do you think, Professor Harshe?
See, I'll tell you two things we have to understand in this. Solutions are slow to come by, but we should feel happy that there is a possibility of revision. This area is extremely important for us because 10 countries are there, 1.8 billion worth market. Now, there is some unevenness about the relationship itself that we have to address. What is that uneven relationship? All these Southeast Asian countries are following export-led growth. So they are good at export, and when they get wide India's expanding market, they are at an advantage. There is also trade deficit that we have to sort out. How does one work out? And there have been always representations against this which have come from no less person like Achyutanand also represented. So somewhere competitive prices we are not able to match, like some prices from coconut from Malaysia are less than here. So many such problems we have to kind of address before solutions are worked out. But most important solution to my mind is we are still not, because one area we have advantages telecommunication. Our, when people go from here to there, our people can go and flood there and also reduce the job prospects for those people. For Southeast Asian countries. But solution in my view is greater connectivity and better infrastructure. That you have to build those roads from northeast which connect to Myanmar and Bangkok, and easy connectivity to flow of goods and services, and also possibilities of investments, so that somewhere it really in true sense becomes a free trade area. I think somewhere trades, if Ambassador Mukherjee is saying is central, then to me infrastructure and communication and telecommunication both were equally central to promote this particular region and trade in this area.
Okay, you suggest that there should be a stress on infrastructure and communications.
Yes, completing the projects which are, we are trying to build a road, let it be connected to Myanmar and Bangkok, roads will go, railway lines have to be laid. So there is a process where goods flow. Services can be hired, telecommunication cooperation can be done, MSME cooperation also is possible, and also constant kind of possibility of looking whether the trade is asymmetric, unequal, whether India has, it should be pro-India in any case.
Right.
Suppose that there was no pro-India trade in the past, we have chance to kind of exit or revise the clause, and that is a good advantage we have with this.
Okay, all right. So Gitanjali Nataraj, let me come across to you now and draw your attention to this issue of trade deficit that has been spoken about widely in the media as well when you talk about ASEAN. Yeah, what are the factors that have contributed to the widening trade deficit?
I think yes, trade deficit is a huge concern for India, not just with ASEAN, I mean with all our major trading partners, including China, which is also a part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement that India is negotiating. All the 10 ASEAN member countries are also a part of this RCEP agreement. Now basically the reason for this trade deficit is that we have not been able to get access to these markets. Our exporters have not been able to get access to these markets because of various regulatory measures, rules of origin requirements, non-tariff barriers, very stringent non-tariff barriers on various products. So many of the exporters are not aware, they are not trained. So I think there should be a lot of capacity building for Indian exporters to make them more aware of the rules that exist in these countries, to ensure that they are aware of the regulatory mechanisms that exist in these countries, to be able to get better market access to ASEAN countries. I think trade deficit is like Professor Harshay just mentioned, there's no overnight solution to this. I mean, we need to work on it, on a very consistent basis to be able to kind of find a solution to this problem.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Moving ahead now, Ambassador, what kind of changes can we expect if the Pact is reviewed? How serious are the ASEAN countries going to be in reviewing this? Because the terms of agreement favor the ASEAN countries at this point in time.
I don't think the terms of agreement by themselves favor the ASEAN countries at the expense of India. We negotiated it, and we are hard negotiators. Our people are good. We've had experience of free trade agreements with other areas and regions. I feel it's simply that in terms of various factors, including endowments and capacities and so on, it's just that the ASEAN countries have perhaps made better use of the free trade area than we have. The review should seek to redress these balances. I think what the Professor Gitanjali mentioned is of crucial importance. So one of our complaints has been, that is why I believe in the press reports that I read of the meetings, one of the items of satisfaction on our side was that the review would look at simplifying the agreement and making it user-friendly. Behind this simple phrase is I think is the understanding on our side of exactly what she mentioned, which is that regulatory mechanisms, the complexities of regulatory mechanisms, non-tariff barriers which are in place, perhaps are not very well understood on the Indian side. Perhaps that is why that may be one of the factors where our exporters fail to take advantage of the opportunities offered by the free trade area. So to make it the way I would interpret this thing of making it user friendly and simple is that we will request the ASEAN countries to make these regulatory mechanisms, these non-tariff barriers, which act as non-tariff barriers, much more transparent and much more easier to negotiate in terms of access to the markets by our exporters. So these are the things I'm sure our negotiators will be looking at. As far as connectivity and infrastructure is concerned, what Professor Harshay mentioned, look, there's no two ways about it. That is central. Without greater connectivity, all our efforts to promote, whether it is trade policy or whether it is trade promotion, which are the two basic pillars of improving trade, whether it's policy or promotion, most of it will not really reach the targets that we want without the improving connectivity and infrastructure. I mean, there have been proposals for the road connectivity, rail connectivity, and various other kinds of projects, specific concrete projects that have been on the table for years, but they have not yet reached fruition. So a concentration on that is going to be key, not because we will gain from it, because both sides will gain from it. Let's not forget that a trade agreement is not something where only India gets the benefits. One way of getting the others on your side in an agreement like this is to offer them something also.
Absolutely.
So connectivity, infrastructure and connectivity that facilitates trade helps both sides and increases the possibility of both sides trying to find a balance in a genuine fashion.
Absolutely. So it has to be a two-way street is what you're suggesting. All right, Professor Harshay, as far as the existing FTA Pact is concerned, what are some of the major concerns for India?
See, I'll tell you what, again, concerns are, trade deficit is a very major concern, that we can't face the world with competitive, which has competitive prices, can be major concern. Somewhere we have to add up to our efficiency, which is a major concern. But some concerns which are underlying and implicit, I would like to mention about. One is, agreements are kind of negotiated clause by clause and area by area, like say small scale sector, plantation sector, manufacturing sector, and Ambassador Mukherjee will tell you more about it. The sector wise it go, but in a broader area I would consider that China is also a very important factor in the entire region, and it is challenging somewhere India's power everywhere, and China is a kind of major Asian power, and we have to take that into account. Plus the fact that somewhere India has to kind of think of maritime security, and it has to have maritime perspective when you are trading with Southeast Asian countries, because India also is a major power today in Asia Pacific region. So this is another area of, that we need to be attentive to. And one more point, which is again implicit and has to be talked about, like suppose your trade goes through the northeastern part of the country to Southeast Asia. I think they are linked. Two aspects are important. This one, that there are already terrorist camps working somewhere like Bodoland, Ulfa or other NSS, Naga National Council group, and they are being financed, supported sometimes by Myanmar, by China, and we have to nose our way through these areas. That has to be kept constantly in mind. And second area that I thought we should be kind of paying our attention to is that India somewhere is one country which is bridging SAARC countries and ASEAN countries. So that is how the BIMSTEC as an organization came into being, and that's where Thailand and Myanmar are part of the BIMSTEC, apart from SAARC countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal. So this area also has to be strengthened. So India has to kind of, minus Pakistan, strengthen this position in the entire South Asian region. And second, look at the terror problem at hand, which is geostrategic, and also maritime perspective and maritime security must be properly thought through, and if this is the background, you can also negotiate through sector by sector, as what Professor Gitanjali was saying, that you have to see what are the regulatory mechanisms in their countries, what are the regulatory mechanisms in this country, what are the tariff and non-tariff barriers, and how both parts can get the best out of it. That would be the way. And it will happen. Just now I can't give you the solution because clauses are read both ways, and exit or entry is also both ways.
Right.
That's why it's premature to say anything on my part.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Gitanjali Latraj, so let's talk about, the scope of trade between ASEAN and India now, and how do we fulfill the entire potential of the trade ties between the two, between India and ASEAN?
I think that trade ties between India and ASEAN have been at an all-time high. I mean, we've already crossed the 80 billion mark trade relations. So I think we're doing fantastic on that front. I mean, of course, there is a lot of scope once these barriers are removed and, once the renegotiation of the FTA takes place, I'm sure India will get more market access to ASEAN countries, and definitely trade is going to pick up further. I mean, the only problem here I see is the trade deficit. I mean, we'll have to really work on it. Our imports from ASEAN have increased at the rate of nearly 14%, whereas our exports have increased only at the rate of about 9 to 10%. And our deficit this year with ASEAN is around 21 to 21 billion, $22 billion, which is really high. It has grown like, 250%. So this is something that we really have to look at, not just with ASEAN, we have to look at our trade deficit with China and all other major trading partners. And this is one front on which the government will have to work really, really seriously. There is enough potential, there's enough scope. ASEAN is one of India's biggest trading partners. We have also have a services agreement with ASEAN, not just trade, And given the fact that we have given so much of concession on the trade front, we have not been reciprocated on the services front. India is asking for market access for its service professionals, which we haven't got still. In fact, the RCEP negotiations also to some extent have been stalled because of this kind of request from India. So I think there are a lot of issues. It's a very complex thing, and it's really, I think it gives a good a boost to the Indian industry that this agreement will be renegotiated. Like Ambassador said, we don't have an exit clause or a review clause in the agreement, and therefore the only way out is to renegotiate. And not only this, we are renegotiating our comprehensive economic partnership agreements with Japan, with Korea, with a lot of other countries, and it was only it was given that we need to renegotiate our FTA with ASEAN as well.
Absolutely. Changing times need a relook really as some of our old agreements are concerned, and that's the best way forward is what you're suggesting. All right, Ambassador. So are there any special sectors or any core areas that we need to focus on going forward?
Well, the two-way trade actually covers a whole, a whole range of things. But in terms of what our negotiators, what our trade negotiators will be looking at, quite apart from simplifying it, making it more transparent, trying to get for us those things that have been denied in the past, exactly like she was saying, we are not at all satisfied in terms of the access given to, the treatment given to the services part of the agreement. Movement of professionals is going to be not only important for this review, the movement of professionals from India, particularly in the services sector, the IT sector, the ICT sector, has been of importance for India across the globe. I mean, in the US and the UK, that is one of the principal irritants that we have to, negotiate all the time. But, the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is still under negotiation and where we are the only country left now which has reservations, is actually going to be very relevant because that will superimpose itself on the free trade area agreement between India and ASEAN. So we'll have to be extremely careful about assuming that we don't walk out of the RCEP because of our objections, assuming that we become a part of it. We'll have to be extremely careful to see how this affects the free trade area with ASEAN, because it is entirely in the realm of possibility that for the much bigger umbrella, which is the RCEP, we might have to face the possibility of changes in the free trade area agreement with ASEAN And there we'll have to be very careful to see that those changes that we agree to or negotiate are actually not against our commercial interests.
Sure.
So these are the areas, I think, where we'll have to be very careful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, trade and economy wise, Professor Harshay, you know, Professor Geetanjali touched upon that aspect as well. How important are the ties between India and ASEAN and vice versa?
See, I'll tell you what, this is very major area for us. 80 billion plus trade is something absolutely important. And this started very slowly actually. When Luki's policy began, that's how it started. And during past 15 years, it has shown such a massive rise that, India is a kind of major trading nation today and one of the major economic and political power in the world. So, ASEAN is very important by all standards. As far as kind of other aspects are concerned, somewhere India has a kind of, it has to have overall policy. It's a peninsula, so it's a kind of castle surrounded by the seas and capped by Himalayas. So somewhere we have to balance it out. These areas are also important to us, Southeast Asian countries as well as West Asian countries. Just the way Afghanistan and Burma are going to be important areas tomorrow when the networks of railroads are linked properly. But as far as I am concerned, because it is an important area, what Ambassador Mukherjee was saying, that main agreement which is coming up with China around, if it is superimposed as such, we have to be very careful about retaining this partnership and also promoting it even further by losing nothing or losing minimum and give something but to get as much as possible, and that is going to be challenge for the future negotiators as far as trade is concerned. As far as economy is concerned, I think the way we are doing in economy, good export and also sustained export in this area is a must. That will reduce our trade deficit and that will also kind of make our presence felt in the entire Southeast Asian region. So somewhere cheaper Indian goods, exchange of personnel and services, like there are problems everywhere as far as personnel are concerned, but our ICT boys, they can do wonders there if they go, and that is where the deficit is. Software kind of trainees, that is where the deficit is, software engineers. And in my view, actually, education is also one important area where we can work out relationship, because those institutions are not as good as many of our institutions, and so many such bilateral agreements could be worked out in the areas of education where knowledge is power today, and India can become a very major hub in entire Asia. And so that is also important area. Tourism is important, but they are stronger there, and our touristic spots are not so well decorated and well deserved for people to attract, and still 1 million people are coming from that part to India. But education is one area we can think about potentially and promote it, because we want to have relationship, and most importantly and lastly, the cultural aspects of it. Like somewhere this particular area has had long association with the Ramayana stage in Indonesia, in Cambodia, in Vietnam. So culturally also India is interlinked with these areas. Sanskrit words are there in those languages. So many ways India can link themselves. Somewhere when you trade, you also try to kind of befriend, and befriending can be a process which kind of has several dimensions. It's not just economic, just not financial, but culturally they must feel at one, pan-Asian somewhere, and they will come round. This is what I feel.
Sure, all right. So, Geetanjali Nataraj, how much is the issue of the trade war between the US and China playing on the minds on the nations in the region to probably have a relook at some of their pacts?
Absolutely. I think this is one thing that we cannot leave out. It's a bitter war that's being fought between the United States and China, and its repercussions have been felt across the globe, and India and ASEAN are no exception to that. But given the fact that most of the developed world is in a kind of a recession and the growth has not been so good, I think Asia continues to be the engine of growth for the world economy. I think, and this is very appropriate, that inter-regional trade among the Asian countries should be the focus for these countries. I mean, they should not be focusing too much on the trade war between China and the United States, and rather focus on improving trade relations, enhancing trade with other countries in the region, try and increase inter-regional trade between ASEAN and India, ASEAN and other countries, and kind of these kind of agreements are also important, India-ASEAN, to act as a counterbalance to China, I think. And when India needs to look at other markets, India needs to look at other regions, and ASEAN is a perfect getaway for India. I think there's a lot of scope for cooperation, cultural ties, tourism, financial technology, startups, MSMEs. These are some of the areas where the two regions can cooperate with each other, and I think the trade war is definitely there in the background. It's had an impact on our exports as well to some extent. India has certainly not been able to capitalize on the trade war that's going on between the China and the US, and not been able to really increase our exports to China. In RCEP, we will have to give steeper concessions, and now we are not ready to give so much under the India-ASEAN FTA. I think India needs to recalibrate its approach, while doing the renegotiations on India-ASEAN. And so there are a whole set of complex issues here, and I think we can only hope that the trade war is going to settle down somewhere soon, and the global economy will be back on its track.
Absolutely. One final closing comment on the program now. Ambassador, what's the best way forward?
Well, if one has to look at the whole picture, not just a tunnel vision on just this free trade area agreement, the best way forward is as always a very, very good look at our internal policies with regard to our own economic growth. Our exports have been now languishing. The industrial sector is in a decline, the extent of which is debated throughout the, politically, of course. But there is no doubt about the fact that it is not just the trade war that is impacting and the global situation which is made the villain of the beast. That definitely has a role to play. I don't think we can isolate our approach to ASEAN and make a set of policies that will enable us to grow our trade and our commercial interests there without actually looking at the more fundamental aspects of our. And we've had the Make in India push. We've had we have a whole set of export incentives in place for many, many years, and we've improved them over the years. Right now, we have to compete. That's the bottom line is that no amount of free trade area agreements is going to make us more efficient exporters. Those will get us advantages and, an exchange of advantages between our partners and ourselves. But that is an important, but only one aspect of this whole question. I think the word competition was used by you. There is no escape from the fact that it's a very competitive world. We have chosen, and we cannot go back on that decision taken in 1990-91 to liberalize our economy. We're still not a really free economy. There are fundamental decisions in the labor area and in land acquisition and various fundamental questions in terms of investment, promotion of economic growth, and especially promoting the productivity and the competitiveness of all our industrial sectors and agricultural sectors so that we become efficient and competitive exporters. That is it in terms of our, you talked of the way forward. That is the way forward.
Sure.
That is the way forward, not just with our relationship with ASEAN, which is extremely important, but worldwide.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.